Thank you, Justin. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight for today's Gifted Support Group meeting. This is brought to you by the Institute for Educational Advancement. My name is Amber McLaren. I'm the Enrollment Manager at IEA, and I am with you tonight with one of our services. IEA is a nonprofit in Pasadena that provides programs for students and services for adults and teachers like us here this evening. I'm really excited to bring in this presenter tonight, Catherine Zakoyan. She is a nationally certified and licensed professional counselor who specializes in children and family counseling for gifted, twice exceptional, profoundly gifted kids, adolescents, teens, adults, and families. She has a newly published book. I'm going to be sharing that link with you in just a moment. The book is Raising Gifted Children, a practical guide for parents facing big emotions and big potential. That is an excellent segue into our title tonight, which she's going to be presenting on the Intercrucible, Truth-Telling, and the Gifted Child. Thank you so much for joining us. And Catherine, I think if you're able to turn on your video, we'll be ready to go.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks so much, Amber. Thanks, Justin. Well, I'm delighted to be here, and I am also happy to talk about this topic because it's one that impacts most everyone, but especially gifted children and their families. And I want to share with you from my own experience in practice what can be helpful to know and what can be helpful to offer to your child to support them in getting to truth-telling in an authentic way. So let's start here. Just some clinical notes that we should keep in mind tonight that I want to bring forward right away. So gifted children usually do not like fibbing any more than their parents do. And it's something to keep in mind because oftentimes there's a assumption that especially children when they fib, that there's something about it that since it works for them in some ways, that works for them in a way that they are proud of it or somehow identified with it, but really gifted children tend not to enjoy fibbing, and they'd rather not. They'd like to find the way out, but they usually don't know the way out. I want to talk for just a moment about the role of shadow, light, and projection. So these are terms. Shadow comes from Carl Jung's work, his body of work. Projection comes more from Freud's work, but I want to weave these in because we'll be talking in these terms a little bit throughout tonight's presentation. So all of us as humans have parts of ourselves we love, whatever our age. So those are our light parts. Those are the parts of us that we're proud of, these parts, and they get us to the places we want to go. And then we also have shadow parts of our personalities. And these are the parts that give us trouble. Sometimes we're aware of them. Sometimes we are not aware of them. Interestingly, when we see someone who has a similar light to our light, we're drawn to them. When we see someone who has a similar shadow to our shadow, we're repulsed by them or we want to move away from them. And it's tricky, particularly with the shadow, because we often don't even know that we possess it ourselves. With the light, another sort of quirky piece is that sometimes the light that we see in someone else that's like ours, we haven't actually ignited yet. But when we're with them, there's something about that person that allows that to come into focus more clearly for us. And that's why it's so fun and lovely to be near them. So it's just some terminology I want you to know about. And the projection, of course, is this human capacity where when we see a quality of ourselves that we almost can't believe we have or we're so uncomfortable with, we'll actually project that out into someone else. So how this comes into play to tonight's conversation and for a gifted family is often, particularly with this issue, most humans have to figure out their relationship to the truth. So most parents have had to go through the pain and anguish of what happens when the truth has not been told or some kind of a breach has happened. So it's very easy to get sort of activated as a parent when your child is fibbing or lying because of your own past experience, whether that's your own shadow or your own light that maybe was involved in something like that. we're tricked or lied to, and it becomes a bit of a house of mirrors. So it's just an important piece that I want to bring forward right away. Again, everyone has the opportunity to figure out their relationship to the truth. And yet where everyone lands is different. This passage is part of being human. This passage is part of growing up. And this is a passage that's part of being gifted. We're going to talk about those three statements a little bit later on, but they're very helpful things to keep in mind, particularly for us perfectionistic gifted people. If we can just help ourselves and our children remember that this is just part of the process of being human, it makes the journey of clearing up fibbing and moving towards truth-telling a little gentler. For some people, this passage cannot be made easily, and we're going to come a little more into focus on why that is. But it's a very, very painful part of being human. And for some people, they can't get to truth telling because of their home environments. So we'll talk about that a little bit later and for some other reasons, but particularly that. So when your children are ready, and when you're ready, you can help your child transition to truth telling. It's important for our next step to look at the role of a few gifted characteristics that we see kind of mixed into this topic and into this matter. We're going to move pretty quickly through those so I can get you to the practices and the tools tonight. I call this talk Intercrucible because there are these key gifted characteristics that can collide with one another and mix together with one another in kind of a crucible, blend together, melt together, and hinder truth-telling, or in some cases often create even worse circumstances for the gifted child. So we're going to take a closer look at those. And here are the four I'm going to highlight tonight that are definitely in that mix. So gifted people, despite their age, young, old, everyone in between, tend to have a strong sense of justice. We often tend to be perfectionistic. We tend to be asynchronous, and we tend to be intense. And those things, those ingredients mix together in the crucible to create quite a brew, particularly when it comes to truth-telling. Let's look at a strong sense of justice first. So these are the things that, having that kind of capacity, these are the things that can result. It can create intense internal and external tension or conflict. So, and that's a little bit complex, right? So we can have intense internal conflict with our sense of justice if we're living in a way, or we're living in a family that's not matched up with something that we think is important and just. We can also have tension in our external world, in our behaviors, and there can be tension or conflict there where our beliefs and our behaviors aren't matching up. We can have both the internal and the external intention or conflict with one another too, right? We know how to do things. We know how to be our best, and yet we can take a poor step into the external world, or we can misstep in the external world, and who we think we are becomes a little more challenging for us. We're going to talk more deeply about this and how this happens for children, but essentially what will happen is if we have a strong sense of justice and we misstep in our own behaviors, actions, or thinking, or we're in some kind of a environment where we have to interface with something that doesn't feel fair or just to us. Gifted people, children and adults alike, often will have an impulse to withdraw from the situation, step away, or disconnect. And sometimes that can even be an internal process that happens because we're sort of astonished with ourselves. Dabrowski would say we're astonished with ourselves. We create a force sometimes in response to something that seems unjust, which can overwhelm. It can overwhelm ourselves and it can overwhelm the other. And a strong sense of justice can also add to existential dilemma, because sometimes we're the lone voice, or sometimes we're the voice that's quiet and it isn't heard when we're trying to be in service to justice. it builds on the existential dilemma of feeling a bit alone and feeling a little bit powerless. And then paradoxically, it underscores a strong sense of justice, underscores an already perfectionistic gifted child's humanity and capacity to also be unjust, because they can see the discrepancies in their behaviors and their actions and in their feelings, where they know they're just, they know they have a strong sense of justice, but they can get pulled in pretty quickly because of their perfectionism into fibbing, into harm, into conflict. And it is startling for them. So a strong sense of justice, although that's shiny and lovely, it has this shadow side where there's a comparative piece, and children are keenly aware when they're not living up to their own internal standards, and fully human in that way. So when gifted children experience themselves as unjust, we'll often see an environment, and this can be home or school or other activities, where competition is prized and where a relationship to competition is off balance. I am not saying don't teach your children about competition or how, sort of how that works. But in environments where competition is prized, it can, again, in that crucible, it can be kind of fiery for a gifted child. And a lot of the perfectionism we see also in that crucible is the gifted child putting themselves in a competition because they're striving in that way. And that's a kind of a painful way to live. A good resource for this, and Amber, maybe you can add this to the chat, is Alfie Kohn's work. He wrote a book called Punished by Rewards. He also has a paper or two on competition. I think he said something akin to, competition is to development as sugar is to teeth. Like, you have to really teach kids about it, but not necessarily throw them into the deep end of it. And I know we all know this, but children tend to discharge pain from somewhere else onto safe targets. So if they've had a rough time at school or they've kept it together, this happens a lot for twice exceptional kids. They'll keep it together during school. And yet, this happens a lot for gifted kids who are not twice exceptional as well. And then they come home and they discharge the pain of that day onto their siblings and parents. The good news about that is children only target the people who they feel safest with. So it's a compliment your child's paying you, but it's a harsh one. And as we know, they feel a lot of remorse and regret about those actions later on. And that sense of justice, again, in that crucible, gets tangled up with all that because they are, again, astonished that they can act and behave and feel that way, feel that much anger towards someone they love, that much intensity. This third point, I know those of you who have more than one child will see, but often siblings will sort of comparatively, they'll approach how things are divvied up in the house, or responsibilities are given based on what's happening for siblings and what's happening for them, and make a bit of a stand around it. The perception of inequity with their siblings is keen, and it can be intense, and it can be ongoing and constant. Additionally, we see, because of the asynchrony where gifted kids have, they tend to be in some ways sort of mature, right? So sometimes the older siblings will end up in sort of a supervisory role with the younger children, and that gets mixed up for them later when the parents step back in, or more in charge, or are in charge. So they're kind of promoted and then demoted, and that feels inequitable to them too. And they want to be involved with the supervision of their younger siblings. Some gifted kids just want to step into that role and be in charge of the whole family. One quick tool that you can put together for children who have that going on is to actually construct some family rules. And the first rule is parents are in charge and what that means. And the second rule is generally something around, in this house, we're kind and respectful to one another. And everyone gets a chance to talk about what that means and what that means. Talk a little bit more deeply about that in my book. If that's helpful, you can certainly look that up. Again, there's devastation and deep regret after the fact. And often we'll hear a gifted child who's gone through this ringer say things that are self-hating and self-harming. They also might have actions that demonstrate self-hate and self-harm. You'll hear things like, I wish I hadn't been born. Why was I born in this family? I don't deserve this family. I don't fit in this family. On up from there to more intense statements. Okay, perfectionism is a paradoxical experience, right? We know for some kids who are underachievers, for example, or some gifted adults who are underachievers, that the perfectionism is sometimes what's at play. They're not even stepping up or stepping into a situation because they are paralyzed by their perfectionism. With fibbing, the paradox is that the fib is often birthed from a desire to be good or perfect or meet expectations, whether they're the teacher's expectations or the parents' expectations. So if they haven't met them or they haven't tried to meet them, they might fib about it. Paradoxically, the fib becomes astonishing and even unbearable to the gifted child because they have to live with it. And we all know with lying and fibbing, it's a snowball. You have to continue the deceit in order for it to hold. And that's a lot of pressure and overwhelm, potentially. So asynchrony cuts across all of this. And, you'll see there's many, many ways that can happen, but just a couple key ones are, you'll see, the difference between a child's chronological age and their mental age and their emotional age come through when they have experienced themselves fibbing. You will see a tendency to sort of, want to be perfect, which we've already talked about, and then they're not perfect because this fib has happened. You'll also see this, just like you see with twice exceptional kids and gifted kids, profoundly gifted kids, when they don't know how to approach something and they're not good at something, they will avoid it rather than tackle it. And if you think about it, fibbing, lying, that's a pretty brilliant coping strategy, avoidant coping strategy, if you don't know the answer or you don't know how to approach the answer. So you see kids, need to go in school, need to go to the nurse's office, or at home they may also have like a physical malady that kind of keeps them out. That's not genuine, but it keeps them out of having to be in an experience where they might fail. All right, intensity. This creates massive, massive internal and external pressure and suffering. We all know this about giftedness. The intensity is keen, and it's in the crucible with fibbing. So how can we help children? Let's start here with, why do children lie? So in my experience, these are sort of the key reasons that I see. It's generally to circumvent parental or other authority. And oftentimes it's because, again, with asynchrony, they feel that they're ready for some experience and their parents are not feeling that way. So they will fib a bit to get around that barrier and be under their own power. Parents tend, with fibs, to overreact, let me back that up. Children lie when their parents tend to overreact to fibbing and lying, or disappointment, or not meeting expectations. So instead of telling the truth, it's easier for them to fib because they can avoid the repercussion of a disappointment or a goal or a target that wasn't met, or a responsibility that wasn't carried out. Gifted kids will also do this to get their needs met. Sometimes they just don't know how to articulate what they need. So we're going to talk about that a little bit later, a tool for that. They also like to be under their own power and be autonomous. So they may just go forging ahead with a fib in order to get some need met. Closely related to that is to obtain goals, including avoidance, which we've already talked about. And of course, gifted children lie to please others at times. This next one is kind of an interesting one. When there's addiction in a family home, so alcoholism would fall in that category, but other kinds of addictions would fall in that too. There's generally a culture of fibbing, because there's some kind of shuffling or maneuvering that has to happen in order to kind of contain that within the family, so the outside world doesn't have an understanding of it or a view of it. When children grow up in that environment, they just learn that that's kind of the law of the land. So it's no big stretch or no big deal to then fib outside of the home, because they already kind of have to. If there's a family culture of fibbing, for whatever reason, and we're going to talk about this as parents and caregivers, what we can do to self-reflect and kind of turn that ship around. If there's a family culture of fibbing, beyond, there's not an addiction, but there's some other reason, maybe keen perfectionism, gifted children, of course, are going to pick that up. If there's a family culture of perfectionism, that on some level sometimes sends a message that's, again, paradoxical, that things need to be perfect. I'm going to give you a tool a little bit later on how to also turn that around. Gifted children lie because they want to be perfect. They also lie because their schoolwork and their school experiences are meaningless. That one is a very, very interesting and common one. And what I find is the key is just having some conversations, like the fibbing about schoolwork and school being meaningless. The keys that bring you into the truth are actually sorting that out with your children, so you can help them advocate, or you can advocate, or you can find a better match, educational environmental match. And then this next one, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on, but this is something I just wanted to make sure you knew about. And Amber was kind enough to put this in the chat. This is called PDA, and it's stands for pathological demand avoidance, which is extreme avoidance of everyday activities due to heightened anxiety. And this is something that's well known and talked about in the UK, and I think also in Australia, but not so well known in North America, like here in the United States and also in Canada. So there's a group, and the website is there. It's pdanorthamerica.com. You can go there for more information. They're actually doing some really interesting training work for parents and providers and I think educators. And what they say, this is how they describe it. It's a newly emerging practice that falls under the autism spectrum that is not in the DSM, which is Diagnostics and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, that's published by the American Psychiatric Association. But it's recognized as an extreme avoidance of everyday activities due to heightened anxiety. So that is something worth looking into if that's of interest to you, of course. And then the last on this list is the experience. And this one, I think whenever I share this with people, they just resonate with this. But if you think about it, the experience of being gifted, the experience of being twice exceptional, the experience of being profoundly gifted, on some level is constant fibbing, because we have learned how to dial ourselves up and dial ourselves down depending on who we're with. So our vocabulary changes, our approach to things changes. So we are constantly sort of not being fully, truly who we are all the time, because we have to adjust to our environment and the people we're in conversation with and people we're in relationship with in the world. So here are some reflections. I just want to do a quick time check. Good. Okay, we're doing well. So we're moving into the tools, but the first place I want to bring you, particularly for parents and caregivers, but also for educators who might be on the call and other people who work with, provide service for gifted children and families. But you want to start with some self-reflection always. And I have two questions for you tonight. And the first is, when and how do you lie? Because it's part of the human capacity, it's part of the human experience. And oftentimes adults who are good-hearted will find themselves lying to spare feelings, to live with a life choice that they've made, because that's the decision they've made. They have the experience of fibbing or lying if they're introverted often, and children are tracking that. If you're calling to bow out of a social commitment, often an introvert won't say, I'm an introvert, or I need downtime. We're not able to come to this event. They'll go to somewhere else, that some other commitment, they'll kind of fabricate something. And kids are tracking that. Also, you see sort of extroversion bring us into fibbing too, with people who need that sort of social swirl to recharge. They might actually seek out relationships and events and social engagements that aren't really their truth in order to just be in that mix. Adults may also lie to get their needs met indirectly if they don't have a way to get their need met directly, to articulate the need they need met. Some adults don't know how to ask for what they need directly. So we're going to talk about that a little bit later for both adults and children. Sometimes gifted people who are adults lie to contain their feelings because it's too overwhelming. The intensity is too overwhelming. The experience of perfectionism is so overwhelming. Their sadness is overwhelming. Their love is overwhelming. So they contain things, or they don't fully disclose how they're feeling. Saying yes when you'd rather say no. That's kind of a big one for a lot of kind-hearted adults. Saying no when you'd rather say yes. That comes up a lot, and that's tied a bit to perfectionism. Compartmentalization. I want to bring this up, not that it's wrong or bad, but that experience that's extreme, right? Where maybe a gifted adult is intense and maybe they're having some kind of an outburst of their own, and then their phone rings and they answer the phone with a pleasant voice, where they compartmentalize at that level, that degree. Again, it's part of the human experience, but children see that as a bit of falsehood. And again, dialing up and dialing down our giftedness. We've talked about that already in the last slide, but it's on that list. And then, where do we buy into cultural and situational mistruths? What do we agree to? What kinds of contracts do we have with our employer, or with our work team, or with our friends, or with society, where we aren't fully living our truths? And the second reflection I have for you tonight is, how do you hold on to your truth? Because you're going to, you have to get in touch with this in order to get in touch with helping your child so they can start to hold on to their truth. So becoming clear on how you're able to do this. Think about reflect on when you've been able to hold on to your truth and what the outcomes were, and maybe what you would do differently, and where you didn't hold on to your truth and what those outcomes look like. Think about what your personal policies tend to be. And often our personal policies are not things we've crafted and drafted and put in writing, but we all have some personal policies. So what do yours look like, and how do those relate to truth telling? What do you want your child to know about establishing and maintaining this capacity of holding on to truth? What tragic things have you seen because people couldn't hold on to their truth, or you couldn't hold on to your truth? And if you're just getting started, particularly this is for women, if you're just getting started or need fortification around holding on to your truth, I like to recommend Carol Gilligan and Lynn Michael Brown's book called Meeting at the Crossroads. And that might be, Amber, that might be a nice thing to put in the chat as well. So it's called Meeting at the Crossroads by Gilligan and Brown. And it's just a longitudinal study of girls' psychological development and how we tend to go a bit underground at some point in service of being perfect and being seen as good girls, and how our adulthood is often a place where we pop back out and try to reclaim our truths. Also, Dabrowski's theory of positive disintegration is a great place to look, but I would look beyond the overexcitabilities. I'd look, those are important, but I'd look at the total of his theory as best you can. And his concept of positive maladjustment, I think, is really germane to this topic. But it's the idea that we adjust ourselves to fit into society and into a society that really isn't always working or isn't always ideal. And the ramifications of that, of working to fit in to something that could be better. All right, I'm going to move us into some practices and tools. And I've given you a few already, but these are my go-to top tools. The middle two, the homework, amnesty, and truth-telling, are a little bit larger sized. So I'm going to move through these first ones a bit quickly. The continued self and child reflection is so important. Reflecting for yourself in a kind way, looking at your shadow. Because here's the thing about shadow work. There's always gold for us. So when we're willing to do that work of our shadow, there is a reward that's massive. Find somebody to reflect for you and do that work with, because it will change your life. For children, for your children and reflecting for them, I would recommend the work, and I talk about this quite a bit in my book about this. I love the work. It's old school work by a couple, the Guernseys, and they, Bernard and Louise, and they had a mission or an objective to teach parents how to reflect for their children in the same way that counselors reflect for their clients. And there's two main ways to do it. One is content reflection, and the other is feelings reflection. But instead of sort of stepping in and trying to solve problems, or stepping in and advising, or stepping in with a lot of questions, this tool of reflection frees you up as a parent or caregiver with your child to initiate a different way of being together, where you're just reflecting for them what you see, what you notice, what you hear them saying, and allowing them the space to connect back up with you about that and validate if you got it right or wrong. And when you first start, your child may not validate, they may not even engage with you, but eventually they will. And it's a wonderful way to show your children that you're there for them without sort of swooping in to resolve something. And of course, there's times where that has to happen for safety reasons and such, but in everyday, ordinary conversations and dilemmas and life, reflection's just a gorgeous way to communicate with your child. So content reflection is just noticing what's going on and saying it out loud, saying word for word what your child might have said to you, or getting close to that. Feelings reflections, you want to take some guesses. I'm going to guess you're feeling a little frustrated with what just went down, and just know that I saw what happened. I'm going to guess you're feeling really happy that we're on our way to see your friend. It's as simple as that. You just drop it. And for boys, the best time to do that is in the car, or when you're walking together, or somehow side by side. Here in Colorado, you might be on a chairlift together. William Pollock's book called Real Boys talks more deeply about communicating with boys. And that idea came from his work. So the next is learning to ask for what you need directly. This is not easy. If you're an adult and you haven't learned how to do this, it's okay. But to get started, you got to find a couple of close people to help you with this, your partner, a good friend, or a coworker. And just say, I'm just learning how to do this. And it might be clunky, but here I go. With children, the way to teach them is when they ask for what they need directly, you say to them, thank you so much for asking for what you needed, or thanks for asking for what you need, before you say yes, before you say no, before you fetch it for them, or whatever interaction needs to happen. Your gifted child's going to become a little, he or she may say, why are you saying that? But don't worry if they do, just keep saying it. Because what happens is, if children don't know how to ask directly for what they need, they go around and get their need met indirectly. And often that's where you'll see the fib come up. A communication template I like to recommend for conversations for parents and children, if you don't know how to start talking about some of these deeper things, I just want to give this to you so you have it tonight, is sort of a template that probably a lot of you have seen, like in workplaces or in coaching, things like that. But it's looking at what's working, what's not working, and what the plan or vision is. So even for family meetings, it's a great way to organize thinking. So you get together and your whole family talks together about what seems to be working really well and where are people struggling, what's not working so well, and what's the vision or plan to address that. You want to have discussions in calm times to offer aid and evaluate a child's readiness to get to truth telling. You don't want to bring it up right after a big event has happened where some deceit has been disclosed. And when I say evaluate readiness, this is what I mean. You tell your child, look, this is part of growing up. And I have this down below. You'll see it there. The same words we saw in the earlier slide. But to say to a gifted child, figuring out how to tell the truth is part of growing up. It's part of being human, and it's part of being gifted. Everyone has to figure out their relationship to the truth. You're not alone. I went through it. Your other parent went through it. Your teachers have gone through it. Some people don't really get to the end where they're truth telling, but if you wish, I can help you get there. And when you're ready, let me know and we'll do it together. And it won't be harsh. It'll be really actually kind of gentle. And I'm going to give you the tool for this here in a few minutes or a few bullets. But I want to give you a couple of quicker tools first. So create a family culture of mistake making. This is the antidote to a family culture of perfectionism, which most gifted houses, whether it's spoken or not, it's an undercurrent of perfectionism. So a family culture of mistake making to me looks like this. You just say out loud the mistakes you make. The ones that we think to ourselves, I just forgot to preheat the oven. You just say that out loud, or you say it at the dinner table when everyone has gathered. And you do it in a way that's gracious and you're not harshing on yourself so that your child has a chance to see you be that kind and loving and non-judgmental towards yourself. You do not want to share the big sort of deep adult mistakes that gifted children, you just don't want to share with your children. But things like, I use this example a lot, but driving through the car wash with your window down, and the back seat gets a little wet. Recipes, any ordinary, everyday, locking yourself out of the house, not being able to find your glasses and they're on top of your head. Talk about that, say it out loud. The next bullet is prepare yourself to speak your truth in order for this to work. If you're asking your child to be a truth teller and you are still bowing out of social commitments with fibs, it's not going to work. And any other places where there's not truth for you. I want to tell you about the homework amnesty tool. So this is for people. A lot of gifted people are procrastinators, and this is linked often to perfectionism, but it's often linked to schoolwork not being meaningful or interesting, or the child already have mastered it and it's just meaningless, busy work. Adults feel this too with the work sometimes we have to do in our professions. So if you have a procrastinator, if you are a procrastinator, that shadow will get activated. Your child's not getting their work done and you're feeling the pain because you also have that capacity. But as adults, we've figured out ways to work around our procrastination. So I propose, and this is a bit radical, that we teach children who are procrastinators, gifted kids who are procrastinators, we teach them how to do that right. We teach them how to do that well, which they have to be part of because it's going to be a little different person to person. The first step is to stop looking at things like Infinite Campus or whatever it's called in your school district, where you're looking online for missed assignments and completed assignments. You can look maybe once a week, but you and your child agree what day that is so they know when you're tracking. Otherwise, I would unplug from that because it creates a lot of conflict. Additionally, you set up with them an environment where you have a generous spirit and they can come to you and say, look, I am way behind, or I am in the weeds and I need to dig out. And you set up a homework amnesty day. And this is sitting, deciding, the child gets to decide what day they want to handle this. Usually it's a weekend day. And they decide everything about the day, what time they wake up, what time they have breakfast, what time are their breaks, what time is lunch, what time will they stop, what work do they need to focus on, where do they want to sit in the house, do they want your help, do they not want your help, if they want your help, what does that look like, do they want music in the background, every detail's dialed in. What do they want for breakfast, lunch, dinner, and snacks? All that's dialed in so they can just work and motor through and push through. And how will you mark the end of the day? Which generally it's nice to do something that's a bit of a celebration. Do a quick time check. All right, so I want to get to the truth-telling tool because this is the biggest tool that I want to offer you tonight, in my opinion. So this is how you untangle fibbing. When your child tells you they're ready, so you've said to them, look, this is part of growing up, this is part of being human, this is part of being gifted. I can help you with this when you're ready and you let me know. When they tell you they're ready, the two of you sit down together and you make an agreement. On your side of the bargain, you agree not to overreact. If they come to you earnestly to tell you they feel like lying or fibbing to you about something, and they have to kind of come clean and tell you what it is. And you have to hold up your end of the bargain and not overreact. Or secondarily, if they've already fibbed, if they've already lied, they come to you and you're in that same generous spirit and they tell you, look, yesterday when you asked me this question, I fibbed to you and I want to come clean about it. And you talk it through. And the talking it through looks something like this. Thank you so much for letting me know. I know that took some courage. I know that's not easy. And I'm really glad you told me, and we're going to get through this. Now, if it's a massive safety concern and there has to be some kind of something set in place or in motion as a result, let them know and let them know at the beginning, when you come to me, if it's a massive safety concern or something that is concerning to me, I may have to step back. I may have to talk to your other parent. We may have to come back to you because this isn't necessarily coming to us with the truth doesn't necessarily mean that we're not going to set some boundaries or something else may happen. But I want you to know that I'm grateful you told me the truth and we'll get through this all together. This is part of my job to help you with this. And it's as simple as that. It's just an opening so children can come clean where they're not feeling judged, they're not feeling wrong, and they're not feeling like they've let anyone down. In fact, they're being a bit supported for coming clean and for bringing the truth to light. And you'll find that it works pretty well. The first couple times are a little bumpy and tearful, and it gets easier. Just quickly, a couple more things I want to add are another tool is to begin to discuss cultural and situational mistruths that are around us in our life. And you can look through the lenses of social media, politics. There's so many places to see where there might be a struggle between the shadow and light. And that's a good place to also talk about these matters. And then you want to help your child to begin to formulate and reformulate their own personal policies around truth-telling, as well as your own. And if you don't know where to start on that, there's a couple places I want to suggest. There's a little book called The Four Agreements that I think is kind of a nice, quick read that just kind of could be helpful in the process. And I think for children who enjoy the classics in philosophy, I think Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics is another place where finding connection points for your child with philosophy. I wouldn't recommend, saying, well, what would Aristotle do or anything like that. It would be more around maybe reading together and then just kind of talking about his ideas. So that is my, those are my, tools for you. And I'm having a little trouble getting to the next, there we go, the final slide. But this is my website. You're welcome, of course, to take a look. You can also reach out to me there if it's helpful. But I really thank you tonight for your time and for coming to this event.
I want to thank you as well for your time tonight. We did get an audience question that I want to run past you, so I'm just going to read it here. It's from Kathy. Question is, my kiddo has issues with gaslighting. When we call out a lie or her having a difficult time that's causing conflict, we will call her attention to it and she gaslights and try to say we are misrepresenting. How do we navigate? Do you have any thoughts or tips on gaslighting, which is a different take on lying?
I wish I had, and that was a written question, of course. I wish I had more information about that. Can you read it again, Amber?
Sure. Yeah. Let me pull that right back up. So this individual's kiddo has issues with gaslighting. When we call out a lie or her having a difficult time that's causing conflict, we will call her attention to it and she gaslights and tries to say we are misrepresenting. How do we navigate?
Okay. All right. So, got it. Thank you. So a couple things. One, you have to take a look at yourselves. Is there any possibility that this happens in a reverse order, where, not that you're gaslighting your child, I'm not quite sure I know exactly what that means, but is there anything that gets a little turned around for your child in your communication? One. Two, I go to reflection. And I don't, Amber, was there an age for this?
There wasn't.
Okay. Try a bit of reflection, try to weave that in to your family culture. And then the other thing that I would recommend is that communication template that I gave to you earlier, which is to sit with your child and be like, look, and you say what's genuinely working, I'm grateful that when we notice that there's something going on that creates conflict, I'm grateful that you stay open to that conversation and that we can begin to have that conversation. But here's where I get stuck. When I say this, the response is this. And there's something in there that's not making sense to me. And I want us to have a little bit more clarity. I need more clarity. So I need to ask you to slow that down for me and give me some examples of when we're misrepresenting or when we're misunderstanding. I want to slow it down and just slow it way down and break it down with that child. And then you make a plan and agreement. And it's probably going to be in those conflictual moments, which are going to be a little fiery. So you may have to say, after we have one of those events, I want us to sit down together as soon as possible, maybe the next day, the next morning, and break it down. Go ahead.
And to clarify, this is a 10-year-old girl.
A 10-year-old girl, yeah. So the other thing to keep in mind is when kids are avoidant, kind of at that level, where they need to spin it around or, have a number of ways that they're kind of backing out of something that's difficult. It's keen perfectionism. And so creating a culture in your home that is genuinely working to make that a gentler nest is really helpful. And I also would, it sounds like, a third party, like a counselor you trust or maybe have somebody else help you untangle that. Because sometimes family dynamics are really fast. They're ricochet fast and it's a house of mirrors and you can't always slow it down enough to get to the bottom of things. So you might want to look at what's called the Karpman triangle, Karpman. I actually talk about this in my book.
The Karpman drama triangle?
Karpman drama triangle, yeah. So there's 3 points, obviously on a triangle. So there's a victim, there's a persecutor, and there's a savior. Although there's different ways to use language around this. I've heard villain, hero, and victim. But what happened, it's exactly that. It's like a fast moving, like musical chairs, and it's really hard to catch the tiger by the tail. But a couple things you can do is when you're not in conflict with your child, if this is going on, but they're in conflict with somebody else and they triangulate you in as the hero or as the savior, right? They're feeling victimized by someone else. They triangulate you in. You don't solve the problem for them. I mean, of course, if it's a big safety thing, you have to think about, but instead you say, it sounds like this is really difficult for you. What have you tried? How can I support you to get ready to figure this out? Because you have to send that sort of perceived victim back to whatever's causing the conflict for them, the villain, because if we're stepping in to save the day, they never learn how to do that. Now, again, if it's safety related, you don't want to send a child back into a dangerous situation. But if it's like a play problem or, a school, conflict that is fairly ordinary, we want to empower children to do that. And here's the problem for gifted people is we love solving problems. So as parents and counselors, we love to sit in that savior seat. We love to sit in that hero seat. And so what happens is if we're not aware of that, and that's part of our perfectionism, right? Because we can't bear to see ourselves in the victim seat. We can't bear to see ourselves in the villain seat, right? That's that shadow. So we anchor into the hero seat, and our children, people we serve, the kids we serve, come to us to rescue them. And it's not helpful for us to do that unless it's really a dangerous situation and we have to get involved. Did that make sense, Amber?
Amber, I will. Oh, go ahead.
Amber, I'm so sorry. I have one more suggestion for that family, for everyone, if you don't mind. When kids are avoidant at that level, you want to look at what's any undiagnosed choice exceptionality. So you want to look at things like central auditory processing disorder and have an appointment with a developmental optometrist to make sure their eyes are working together. And then also, of course, looking for other culprits like dyslexia, because sometimes we don't see those, as we know, right, with young kids, because they're able to manage the schoolwork, but then they start to not be able to interface with the work at a certain point. So sometimes when you see amped up perfectionism and avoidance at that level, you want to look at any undiagnosed choice exceptionality. Sorry to interrupt, but I just want to make sure I put that in the mix because it's so important.
Great advice. Thank you. And I think you hit the nail on the head that these kids are gifted and they're really talented and they're good at finding alternative pathways. So it could be something else. I appreciate your bringing that up. Excellent. Any other last minute questions before we sign off? Please send them in now. Otherwise, final thoughts, Catherine, anything that you'd like to end this presentation on with us to take away?
I just really appreciate everyone, and I appreciate the work that your organization does, Amber. Thanks for being there for families.
Thank you. And I really feel like there were a lot of topics we just danced around tonight. For example, the light and shadow that I think we could visit in more detail. So I'll certainly be following up with you on how we can continue to collaborate together for our families. So thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Those of you who are RSVP'd, you'll be getting a follow-up email from me later this week or early next week. For everyone else, thank you so much for joining in, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Have a great evening.